Susan Johnson had mastered the art of perpetual motion. At 26, she existed in a state of constant transition, brewing espresso shots at dawn, answering phones by afternoon, folding cashmere by weekend. The phone call came during her shift at the boutique, her mother's voice warm with anticipation. "We can't wait to meet him, baby. Your aunt's already planning the menu." Susan's throat constricted. The boyfriend she'd invented 6 months ago had somehow evolved into expected reality. She'd created him during a moment of weakness, exhausted by the pity in her mother's eyes, the concern that maybe Susan was sacrificing too much, becoming too hard, too isolated in her relentless pursuit of something better. Now that fiction was demanding flesh and blood. Susan was wrapping an $8,000 watch when the atmosphere shifted. A man entered, tall, dark-haired, moving with the kind of certainty that suggested the world routinely rearranged itself for his convenience. 2 men in identical black suits flanked him like shadows given form. Min-jun possessed the kind of face that belonged on currency or wanted posters, all sharp angles and controlled intensity. His eyes, pale gray and unnervingly focused, surveyed the boutique as if calculating its worth to the penny. He needed a gift for his grandmother. Everything Susan suggested, elegant scarves, vintage brooches, artisan perfumes, received the same dismissive shake of his head. Frustration overrode professionalism. Maybe if you actually cared about her instead of throwing money at the problem, you'd know what she likes. The store went silent. His security detail tensed, hands moving subtly toward concealed weapons. Susan's heart hammered against her ribs, but she held his gaze, refusing to apologize for speaking truth. Then Min-jun laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his severe features into something almost approachable. "I like you. What's your name?" Before she could answer, her phone erupted with notifications. The family group chat, her aunt's message glowing on the screen. "Can't wait to meet Susan's mystery man. We're all so proud she finally found someone good." Shame flooded through her, hot and paralyzing. She fumbled to silence the phone, but Min-jun had already seen everything. When she forced herself to meet his eyes, she found him studying her with unnerving intensity. "You don't have a boyfriend." Not a question, a statement delivered with absolute certainty. Her silence confirmed what her expression had already betrayed. He leaned closer, voice dropping to a tone meant only for her. "Pretend I'm your boyfriend." The restaurant existed in that rarefied atmosphere where prices weren't listed and waiters moved with choreographed precision. Susan felt grotesquely out of place in her thrift store dress, but Min-jun appeared completely at ease, as if he'd been born knowing which fork to use. He spoke with businesslike efficiency. The family, his family, carried weight in certain circles, the kind of weight that made politicians nervous and prosecutors careful. For 7 years, he'd been systematically legitimizing their operations, transforming blood money into real estate portfolios, import-export ventures, and private security contracts. It was exhausting, thankless work that earned him enemies on both sides of increasingly blurred lines. Nonna Lucia, the family matriarch, represented the last connection to something resembling normalcy. She wanted him married, settled, producing the next generation. Every woman she'd introduced came with complications, political alliances, family expectations, prenuptial agreements drafted before the first date. His cousin Enzo was capitalizing on this perceived weakness, whispering that Min-jun had lost touch with family values, gone soft in his pursuit of legitimacy. Christmas arrived in 6 days. Nonna Lucia expected him to bring someone home, someone authentic, not another calculated arrangement. "I need someone she'll believe I could love," he said. "Someone warm, real, someone who doesn't want anything from me." Susan should have walked away. Every instinct screamed danger. But he was offering $10,000, 2 semesters of tuition, and her mother's roof repair. The terms were simple. December 23rd through January 1st. Christmas Eve with her family in South Carolina, then New York for his family's New Year celebration. He'd provide everything. Wardrobe, coaching, transportation. She'd play the devoted girlfriend. No intimacy beyond what appearances demanded. The contract terminated at midnight, January 1st, like some twisted Cinderella story. Susan negotiated her own terms. He couldn't reveal his real business to her family. no involving her in anything illegal. He'd help with whatever her family needed without complaint. "I need them to believe you're good for me," she said, voice tight with something between pride and desperation, "that I'm not making another mistake." He agreed, but added his own condition. "No research, no digging into my life, asking around about me. You learn about me by being with me." She hesitated, pen hovering over paper. Then she signed, sealing a bargain that would either save her or destroy everything she'd worked to build. The black SUV looked obscene against the backdrop of her childhood street, a gleaming predator among rusted sedans and pickup trucks held together by prayer and baling wire. Susan watched through the cracked window as Min-Jun emerged, and her stomach twisted with anticipatory dread. He wore a charcoal cashmere sweater that probably cost more than 3 months of her coffee shop wages, dark jeans that fit with the precision only money could buy, leather shoes that had never known scuffed linoleum or patched concrete. This was a mistake, a terrible, irreversible mistake. Her family's house sagged under the weight of decades and deferred maintenance. The porch, listed slightly to the left, paint peeled in long, tired strips, revealing generations of color choices beneath. Blue, yellow, white, each layer a different era of hope. Her mother had tried to camouflage the poverty with Christmas decorations, dollar store garland wrapped around the porch railing, a wreath made from pine cones and ribbon on the door that hung slightly crooked, multicolored lights strung with more enthusiasm than precision. Susan positioned herself between Min-Jun and her family's reality, ready to interpret, to explain, to apologize for everything they weren't. She watched his face with the intensity of someone expecting detonation, waiting for the microscopic flinch of distaste, the subtle recalibration of someone confronting a world they'd only seen through car windows. It never came. Instead, when her mother pushed open the screen door, the one with the tear in the mesh that let mosquitoes through all summer, Min-Jun smiled. Not the polite, calculated smile she'd seen him use at the boutique, but something softer, almost vulnerable. He climbed the uneven steps without hesitation and wrapped his arms around her mother before Susan could even make introductions. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, voice warm and unguarded, "thank you for having me. Your daughter talks about you constantly." Her mother, small, worn thin by years of stretching insufficient resources across too many needs, melted into the embrace. Over Min-Jun's shoulder, her eyes found Susan's, shining with something between relief and vindication. "See?" those eyes said. "You do deserve good things." Guilt twisted in Susan's chest like a living thing. Inside, the house revealed itself in painful detail. The living room furniture dated from the 90s, upholstery faded and patched. The carpet, once beige, had been walked into submission, paths worn to the subflooring in high traffic areas. The television was ancient, the kind with actual depth, positioned to hide the water stain on the wall behind it. Everything was immaculately clean. Her mother had scrubbed for days, but cleanliness couldn't disguise structural exhaustion. Min-Jun moved through the space as if he'd grown up there. He accepted the tour with genuine interest, commenting on family photos, asking questions about the history preserved in frames and albums. When they reached the kitchen, cramped, with counters that didn't quite meet the walls and a refrigerator that hummed ominously, he insisted on helping her mother prepare dinner, rolling up his expensive sleeves to chop vegetables with surprising competence. Her father shuffled in from the back room, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had betrayed him. The factory accident had left him partially disabled, capable of limited movement but robbed of the physical labor that had defined his identity. He settled into his chair, the good one, with the cushion that accommodated his back, and studied Min-Jun with the quiet assessment of a man who'd spent decades reading people for survival. Min-Jun sat across from him without prompting, leaning forward with the posture of someone prepared to listen. "Mr. Johnson, Susan mentioned you worked at the textile plant before it closed." What followed was remarkable. Her father, usually quiet to the point of silence around strangers, began talking. Stories poured out about the plant's glory days, the community it sustained, the betrayal of closure, the men he'd worked beside who'd scattered to other states chasing dwindling opportunities. Minjun listened with complete attention, asking informed questions, nodding at the right moments, understanding the particular grief of watching your life's work become irrelevant. Susan stood in the doorway, forgotten, watching this man she'd met 72 hours ago connect with her father in ways she'd stopped hoping anyone would. Outside, her younger siblings, Marcus, 14, and Destiny, 11, had been cautiously observing through windows. When Minjun finished talking with their father, he found them in the backyard, that patch of hardscrabble earth where grass had long ago surrendered to red clay and determination. Without hesitation, without concern for his expensive clothes, he joined their game of catch, running and laughing with an unself-consciousness that seemed impossible for someone who commanded rooms and controlled empires. The interrogation arrived with dinner, delivered by Aunt Claudette and Aunt Joyce, her mother's sisters, women whose support had always come wrapped in judgment, whose help carried price tags of criticism and comparison. They positioned themselves across from Minjun like prosecutors, exchanging glances that communicated entire conversations. "So," Aunt Claudette began, voice syrupy with false sweetness, "how exactly did you two meet?" Minjun set down his fork with deliberate calm. "At the boutique where Susan works, I came in looking for a gift, being difficult about it, and she told me I was throwing money at problems instead of actually caring about solutions." He smiled at Susan, and something in his expression made her breath catch. She was completely right. Most people don't have the courage to be that honest with me. "And what kind of work do you do?" Aunt Joyce pressed, eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Import-export primarily. Family business. We facilitate international trade, handle logistics for companies expanding overseas." "All technically true," Susan noted, "just incomplete. What you want with our Susan?" Aunt Claudette's question carried decades of protectiveness and doubt, the unspoken suggestion that someone like Minjun couldn't possibly want someone like Susan without ulterior motivation. Minjun's expression shifted, became serious. "Honestly, she intimidates me in the best way. She works harder than anyone I've ever met, cares deeper, expects less. She makes me want to be better than I am." He reached across the table, fingers brushing Susan's hand. "I'm the lucky one here." The aunts exchanged glances, defenses crumbling against sincerity they hadn't expected. Night brought new complications. Susan's childhood bedroom had shrunk in her memory, or perhaps Minjun had expanded. The double bed with its sagging mattress dominated the tiny space. The heating barely functioned, a long-standing problem her mother couldn't afford to fix, leaving the room cold enough to see breath. Minjun surveyed the situation without comment, simply building up the space heater to its maximum setting and arranging the thin blankets with the efficiency of someone accustomed to making do. He claimed the side against the wall without discussion, leaving Susan the easier exit, a consideration she noted but didn't acknowledge. She constructed a barrier of pillows between them with exaggerated precision, a physical manifestation of their contract's boundaries. Minjun watched with what might have been amusement, but said nothing. Lying in darkness, Susan remained hyper-aware of everything. The dip in the mattress pulling her slightly toward him, the warmth radiating from his body in the cold room, the expensive cologne that seemed obscene in this space of her childhood. He lay on his back, perfectly still, breathing with the measured rhythm of someone either asleep or performing sleep. She wondered if he ever truly rested, or if stillness was just another form of control. Christmas Eve morning arrived with the particular chaos that only a Southern family kitchen could produce. Too many bodies occupied too little space, everyone moving in a choreographed disorder that had been perfected over generations. Susan's mother presided over the mayhem like a general commanding beloved troops, dispatching orders with the certainty of someone who'd orchestrated this miracle annually for decades, despite impossible odds. "Minjun, baby, come here. You're going to learn to make sweet potato pie the right way." Susan froze, spatula suspended mid-stir, waiting for the polite deflection, the charming excuse. Instead, Minjun abandoned his position at the counter where he'd been attempting to help her uncle with the collard greens and moved to her mother's side with the obedience of a dutiful son. What followed defied every assumption Susan had constructed about who this man was. He listened with complete attention as her mother explained the recipe passed down from her grandmother. No written measurements, everything done by feel and instinct. He cracked eggs, mixed ingredients, his expensive watch dusted with flour as he worked the dough with hands that signed contracts and commanded empires, but now shaped pie crust with surprising gentleness. Flour settled in his dark hair like premature gray, and he didn't brush it away. When he got the ratio wrong and the filling came out too runny, he laughed at himself, a real laugh, unguarded and warm, and started over without complaint. Maya, Susan's 7-year-old sister, had been observing from the doorway with the intense focus of a child making critical decisions. Apparently, Minjun passed some invisible test because she attached herself to him with the devotion of a new disciple. She climbed onto the counter beside him, narrating her thoughts on pie making and Christmas, and whether Santa would bring her the dollhouse she'd asked for, her small hand resting on his arm with complete trust. He never once seemed annoyed. He answered her questions seriously, solicited her opinion on crust thickness, complimented her reindeer sweater with genuine admiration. Susan watched from across the kitchen, something uncomfortable expanding in her chest, an ache that felt dangerously close to hope. But Minjun's attention extended beyond the immediate chaos. Susan noticed him noticing things, the way her father avoided the kitchen sink, the particular path everyone took to avoid the outlet near the refrigerator, the meaningful looks exchanged when someone mentioned her mother's car sitting in the driveway with tires so bald the threads showed through. Between stirring pots and wrapping last-minute gifts, Minjun made phone calls. He stepped onto the cold porch, voice low, conversations brief and efficient. Susan told herself it was business, that men like him never truly stopped working, that she shouldn't read meaning into his concerned glances at the water-stained ceiling. By evening, as the winter sun collapsed behind pine trees and darkness settled over the neighborhood, trucks arrived. Contractors, electricians, a mechanic towing a flatbed with 4 new tires. They introduced themselves with the casual lie of coincidence. Just happened to be in the area. Thought we'd take a look at that pipe outlet vehicle situation if you folks don't mind. Her father's suspicion manifested immediately, jaw tight with the pride of a man who'd spent his life providing and now couldn't. "We didn't call anyone. Can't afford—" "Already paid for," the lead contractor interrupted gently. "Anonymous donor through the church fund. Pastor James sent us over." Her mother pressed both hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her face, relief and gratitude and the particular shame of needing help mixing into something too complicated for words. Susan found Minjun in the backyard, ostensibly supervising Maya's elaborate chalk nativity scene on the concrete patio. She grabbed his arm, pulled him aside where shadows provided privacy. "You can't just—" "I didn't do anything," he said calmly, meeting her eyes with that infuriating directness. "Some problems solve themselves when you know who to call." "That's not— We had an agreement. No charity, no— The agreement was that I'd help with whatever your family needs during the visit without complaint." His voice remained even, almost gentle. "This is me helping, without complaining." She wanted to be angry. The words assembled themselves in her throat. Accusations about control, about rich men solving problems with money they'd never miss, about the humiliation of being saved. But looking at his face, she saw no self-satisfaction, no performance of generosity. Just quiet certainty that this was right. That people he cared about shouldn't struggle with fixable problems, people he cared about. The thought arrived unbidden, dangerous. Midnight service required walking 6 blocks to the church, a small brick building with a modest steeple and a parking lot that doubled as a basketball court in decent weather. The congregation was mostly black, multi-generational, the kind of community built over decades of shared faith and shared struggle. Minjun was the only white face in the room. Susan watched for discomfort, for the subtle withdrawal of someone confronting their own otherness. Instead, he shook hands with genuine warmth, accepted hugs from church mothers who'd known Susan since birth, sang hymns from a borrowed hymnal with surprising familiarity with the melodies, if not the specific words. During the candlelight prayer, when the sanctuary dimmed and individual flames multiplied into collective illumination, he reached for her hand. His grip was too tight, almost painful, fingers laced through hers with desperate intensity. She squeezed back, a question without words. "Outside afterward," While families lingered in conversations and children ran circles around the nativity scene, Susan found Minjun standing alone, staring at the plastic figures arranged on artificial straw. His breath fogged in the cold air, and something about his posture, shoulders curved inward, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, spoke of a vulnerability he never permitted in daylight. "My mother died on Christmas Eve," he said quietly, not looking at her. "Car accident. Black ice on the highway coming home from visiting her sister. I was 10. His voice carried no emotion, just facts delivered with the flatness of someone who'd learned not to feel them. After that, Christmas was just another day my father worked. I haven't been to church since her funeral." Susan didn't know what to say. Nothing seemed adequate, so she simply moved closer, her arm brushing his, sharing warmth and presence and the acknowledgement that some griefs never fully heal. Back in the tiny bedroom, the pillow barrier felt absurd, a childish boundary that denied the reality of what was developing between them. But neither of them dismantled it, both still clinging to the fiction of their contract, the safety of predetermined limits. Maya destroyed that fiction at 5:30 Christmas morning, bursting through the door with the shrieking joy of a child who'd found evidence of Santa's visit. She launched herself onto the bed, landing squarely on the pillow barrier and scattering it to the floor, wedging herself between them with complete faith in her welcome. "He came! He came! Santa ate the cookies and everything!" Minjun, who moments before had been sleeping with that eerie stillness, transformed. He pulled Maya into a gentle headlock, making exaggerated sounds of surprise, asking detailed questions about what Santa had brought while Susan watched, something inside her chest cracking open. They didn't rebuild the barrier. Later, after the chaos of gift opening and breakfast, Minjun handed Susan a simply wrapped package. Inside, a check for $50,000 and a note in his precise handwriting. "Not part of our deal. Your mother needs more than a roof. You need to stop carrying everyone alone." Susan stared at the numbers, unable to process their reality. This wasn't help. This was transformation. This was freedom. "I can't. This is too much. It's not nearly enough," he interrupted quietly. Her gift to him felt pathetic in comparison, a hand-carved wooden rosary she'd found at a local artisan's shop, the beads worn smooth, the crucifix simple and honest. She handed it over with apologies forming on her tongue. They died when she saw his face. All control vanished, replaced by naked grief and wonder. His hands trembled as he held the rosary, fingers tracing each bead with reverent care. "My mother had one like this," he whispered, voice breaking. "I couldn't find it after she died. My father, he got rid of everything." For the first time since she'd met him, Minjun's carefully constructed armor shattered completely. And Susan saw the boy who'd lost his mother on Christmas Eve, who'd been carrying that loss alone for 26 years. The Manhattan skyline glittered like shattered diamonds against the winter night, but Susan couldn't appreciate the view from the town car's window. Her stomach churned as they approached the family estate, a fortress of old money and older secrets tucked away in the heart of the Upper East Side. Minjun sat beside her, perfectly composed in his tailored suit, but she felt the tension radiating from him like heat from pavement in summer. The estate was everything she'd feared. Marble floors stretched endlessly beneath soaring ceilings adorned with crystal chandeliers that cost more than her mother's house. Oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors watched from gilded frames, their eyes following her as servants whisked away their luggage. This wasn't just wealth, it was dynasty, legacy, the kind of power that crushed ordinary people like insects. The relatives descended within hours. Cousin Enzo arrived first, all sharp edges and sharper smiles, his eyes calculating as they swept over Susan like she was livestock at auction. He spoke to Minjun in rapid Korean, words flowing like silk-wrapped daggers, and though she caught only fragments, she understood the tone perfectly. "Who is this girl? What game are you playing?" The aunts came next, 3 regal women in designer suits who kissed Minjun's cheeks and examined Susan with the thoroughness of jewelers appraising a suspicious gemstone. They spoke English when addressing her directly, but switched to Korean for their private asides, their laughter like wind chimes made of ice. Uncle Salvatore, broad-shouldered and gray-templed, squeezed her hand too hard during introductions, his smile never reaching his eyes. Dinner was an ordeal. 20 family members around a table that could have seated 40, multiple courses served by silent staff, conversation swirling in a mixture of English and Korean that left Susan perpetually half a beat behind. She felt every difference between herself and these people, her department store dress among their couture, her public university vocabulary against their prep school polish, her mother's second-hand furniture versus their generational wealth. Min-jun played his part perfectly, the dutiful grandson introducing his fiancée, but she saw the cost in the tightness around his eyes, the controlled precision of every gesture. This was his world, but it was also his cage. It was Nonna Lucia who changed everything. The matriarch had sat quietly through dinner, observing with dark eyes that missed nothing. The next morning, she found Susan alone in the vast kitchen, desperately seeking coffee and courage. "Sit," Nonna Lucia commanded, her accent thick but her English clear. She poured espresso into tiny cups, her movements economical despite her age. "You are wondering why you are here, why he chose you." "The contract," Susan began, but Nonna Lucia waved this away like smoke. "My grandson, he doesn't smile like that, not since his mother died." The old woman's eyes were fierce, pinning Susan in place. "For 16 years I watch him become stone, cold like his father wanted. But you make him remember how to be happy. I see it. The way he looks at you when you are not watching. The way he laughs, really laughs, not the political laugh he uses with the others." The guilt crashed over Susan like a wave. Because this, whatever this had become between them, wasn't supposed to be real. It was business, a transaction. She was being paid to pretend, and somewhere along the way, the pretending had started to feel like something else entirely, something dangerous. "I don't," Susan's voice cracked. "It's complicated." Nonna Lucia patted her hand, surprisingly gentle. "Love is always complicated, Cara, but it is worth the complication." That night, the nightmares came. Susan woke to Min-jun thrashing beside her in the guest room they were sharing for appearances. He was speaking Korean, rapid and anguished, his face twisted in terror. She'd never seen him anything but controlled, and the vulnerability of it shocked her. "Min-jun," she whispered, touching his shoulder. "Min-jun, wake up." He came awake like a fighter, fast and dangerous, his hand closing around her wrist before his eyes even opened. For half a heartbeat, she saw something feral in his face, something that understood violence on an instinctual level. Then, recognition flooded in, and he released her like she'd burned him. "Christo," he breathed, running shaking hands through his hair. "I'm sorry. I wouldn't. I know," she said softly. "You were having a nightmare." He stood, pacing to the window, his bare shoulders rigid with tension. The city lights painted him in shifting shadows. Susan waited, knowing somehow that this moment mattered, that whatever he said next would change the carefully maintained distance between them. "My mother's accident wasn't an accident." His voice was hollow, scraped raw. "The Castellano family, rivals of ours, they sent a message. A car that lost control at exactly the right moment. She died on impact." Susan's breath caught. "Min-jun." "My father became something else after that, something ruthless. He was determined to make me harder, colder, exactly what he thought this world demanded, exactly what would keep me alive." Min-jun's reflection in the window looked haunted. "But my mother, before she died, she made me promise I'd be different, that I'd be good even in this world, that I'd find something real." "You honored that promise," Susan said. "You're nothing like—" "I run an empire built on fear," he cut her off. "I've made decisions that would horrify you. I'm exactly what my father trained me to be, except I hate myself for it. Every single day." The confession hung between them, raw and bleeding. Min-jun turned to face her finally, and the vulnerability in his expression made her chest ache. "I'm so tired," he whispered, "tired of being alone in this, of pretending I don't want something normal, something real." Susan crossed the room without thinking, drawn by the pain in his voice, the desperate honesty. When she reached him, he caught her face in his hands, his touch achingly gentle despite the calluses she felt there. They kissed. It wasn't like the chaste touches they'd performed for his family. the careful charade of affection. This was desperate, real, tasting of truth and longing and all the things they'd been denying. His hands tangled in her hair, her fingers gripped his shoulders, and for one perfect moment, nothing else existed. When they broke apart, reality crashed down like a building collapse. "The contract," Minjun said, but his voice was hollow, already mourning. "This was just business." "Right," Susan agreed, forcing the word past the tightness in her throat. "Just business." But they both knew it was a lie. The New Year's Eve gala at the estate sparkled with champagne and crystalline chandeliers, but beneath the glittering surface, danger coiled like a serpent waiting to strike. Enzo had been patient, methodical, watching his cousin's unprecedented transformation with calculating eyes. For weeks he'd observed Minjun's distraction, noted every lingering glance at the black girl from South Carolina, catalogued each deviation from the cold pragmatism that had defined the air. Now, as midnight approached and another year prepared to dawn, Enzo was ready to make his move. He'd assembled his evidence carefully: photographs of Minjun laughing genuinely at Susan's family table, financial records showing charitable donations to South Carolina community centers, testimony from family members about Minjun's softening. Most damning of all, he had proof that Susan Jackson came from nothing: a rental house with a leaking roof, a mother working double shifts, a family surviving paycheck to paycheck. In the ruthless calculus of Mafia politics, this wasn't romance. It was weakness, sentimentality, a fatal vulnerability in a man who needed to project absolute strength. "She's your Achilles heel," Enzo whispered to Minjun in a quiet corner of the ballroom, his smile sharp as broken glass. "A poor black girl with no connections, no dowry, no use to this family except making you look weak. The old guard already questions your legitimacy. What do you think they'll say when they learn you've gone soft over someone so irrelevant?" The threat hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear. Enzo would expose Susan, frame her poverty and her race as evidence of Minjun's poor judgment, his compromised position. He'd paint their relationship as a liability, proof that Minjun had lost the predatory edge necessary to lead. In their world, perception was everything, and Enzo held the power to destroy not just Minjun's reputation, but Susan's peace, her family's safety, everything she'd worked so hard to protect. Minjun's jaw tightened, his mind racing through scenarios and solutions, weighing risks against consequences. He could fight Enzo, expose his machinations, defend his choices, but that would only drag Susan deeper into the shadows of his world. It would paint a target on her back that would never fade, make her a permanent pawn in family power plays she never asked to be part of. Every instinct screamed at him to protect her, even if protection meant pushing her away. The decision crystallized with brutal clarity. Sometimes love meant letting go. Sometimes strength looked like sacrifice. He found her on the terrace, watching fireworks bloom across the Manhattan skyline in preparation for midnight. She wore the emerald dress he'd chosen, looking like she belonged in his world, even as he prepared to banish her from it. When she smiled at his approach, something inside him shattered. "Susan, we need to talk." The coldness in his voice made her smile falter. She turned fully toward him, searching his face, finding only the icy mask he'd perfected over years of emotional survival. "What's wrong?" "This arrangement. It's over." The words came out clipped, brutal in their efficiency. "The contract ends tonight at midnight. You should go back to your life before my world destroys it completely." She stared at him, processing, pain flickering across her features before pride locked it down. "What are you talking about? Minjun, what happened?" "Nothing happened. That's the point." He forced himself to look at her, to deliver the killing blow. "This was always temporary, a business transaction. You got what you needed, money for your family. I got what I needed, credibility, legitimacy, someone to play the role. But it's done now. The performance is over." "Performance?" Her voice cracked on the word. "Minjun, look at me. Look me in the eye and tell me the last month was just performance." He met her gaze, hating himself, loving her too much to let her stay. "I told you from the beginning. Don't fall in love with me. Don't mistake the contract for something real." The slap came fast, sharp, echoing across the terrace. Susan's hand trembled as she pulled it back, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You coward, you absolute coward. Something scared you, someone threatened you, and instead of trusting me, trusting us, you're doing this. There is no us, he said, each word a self-inflicted wound. There never was. Just a poor girl desperate enough to sell her time and a lonely man willing to pay for the illusion of connection. Don't romanticize it, Susan. It cheapens us both. She laughed, a broken sound that hurt worse than her anger. You're right. God, you're absolutely right. I was stupid to think this was anything but money. Stupid to think a man like you could actually care about a woman like me beyond what I could provide for your image. Susan. No. She held up her hand, stopping him. You've said enough. I'll be gone in the morning. Before midnight, actually. No point in dragging this out. She walked past him, spine straight, head high, every inch the queen she'd pretended to be. Minjun watched her go, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to chase her, to explain, to beg her to understand. But explaining would only endanger her more, and he'd already hurt her enough for one lifetime. Inside, the countdown to midnight had begun. 10, 9, 8. Susan grabbed her coat, her purse, left the emerald dress hanging in the closet like a discarded dream. 7, 6, 5. She was in a taxi heading to her hotel when midnight struck, when the city erupted in celebration, when champagne corks popped and strangers kissed and a new year began. 4, 3, 2, 1. The contract ended. The Cinderella story concluded. The carriage turned back into a pumpkin, and the girl from South Carolina went home. On New Year's Day, Susan boarded a bus back to Charleston, unwilling to use Minjun's money for anything more than absolutely necessary. The check sat in her account, deposited with clinical efficiency. $25,000, blood money, heart money, the price of pretending, of hoping, of briefly believing in fairy tales. She transferred $20,000 to her mother immediately, kept $5,000 for one semester of nursing school, enough to start, to prove she could do this without him, without anyone. Her mother met her at the door, took one. Look at her face, and pulled her into a hug that finally broke the dam. Susan cried for hours, for the loss of something that was never hers, for the dream that ended before it could truly begin. 3 weeks into January, Susan's life had transformed in ways both practical and profound. The house, the same rental that had leaked and creaked and threatened to collapse, was being renovated from foundation to roof. New pipes, new wiring, new windows that actually sealed against the cold. Her mother walked through the construction with wonder in her eyes, touching solid walls like she couldn't believe they were real. Susan had enrolled in nursing school, starting her prerequisites at the local community college with a fierce determination that surprised even herself. She studied obsessively, filling the hollow space in her chest with anatomy and pharmacology, replacing thoughts of emerald dresses and Korean grandmothers with medical terminology and clinical procedures. Her family knew the truth now. She'd told them through tears one night, expecting disappointment, shame, judgment for accepting money to play a role, for lying about a relationship. Instead, her mother had held her face in both hands and said something that shook Susan's carefully constructed narrative. Baby, fake boyfriends don't look at you like that man looked at you. I may not have fancy degrees, but I know love when I see it. Aunt Claudette had agreed. Maya, young enough to speak truth without filter, had asked simply, "Is Mr. Minjun coming back?" Susan had said no. Convinced herself she meant it, February arrived cold and clear, the South Carolina winter crisp and bright. Susan was studying at the kitchen table, surrounded by flashcards and textbooks, when the knock came. She assumed it was another contractor, someone checking measurements or timelines. She opened the door to find Minjun standing on her mother's newly reinforced porch. He looked different, thinner, tired, the confident polish slightly dimmed, but his eyes, when they met hers, burned with an intensity that stole her breath. "I don't have a contract this time," he said without preamble, just the truth. "Minjun, please, let me say this." He took a breath, steadying himself. "Enzo has been handled, exposed for skimming family money, for plotting against me. He's exiled, finished. The legitimization is complete. Nonna Lucia called me a fool. She was right. My mother, the family, they're all settled. I have everything I thought I wanted. Then why are you here? Because none of it matters without you. The words came out raw, stripped of pretense. I'm in love with you, Susan. Not the woman I hired, not the performance. You. I love your family, your strength, the way you carry everyone and never complain. I love that you're not afraid to challenge me, to call me on my shit. I love that you see past the money and the name to who I actually am. Susan's hands trembled. You threw me away. I was trying to protect you. He stepped closer, desperate for her to understand. Enzo threatened to expose you, to use your family, your background, everything about you as a weapon against me. I thought pushing you away would keep you safe. I thought I was being strong. I was just being a coward. You hurt me. The accusation carried months of pain. I know. I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry, Susan. His voice cracked. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to trust me again. But I had to tell you the truth. I want real. No more contracts, no more performances, just you and me figuring it out together. She studied him, searching for deception, finding only vulnerability. Your world and mine don't mix, Minjun. You said it yourself. I'm a poor black girl from South Carolina. Your family. My family fell in love with you just like I did, he interrupted. Nana Lucia asks about you weekly. My mother kept the recipes you shared. Antonio hasn't stopped talking about your cousin's cooking. They don't care about your bank account or your background. They care that you're genuine, that you made me human again. And when the next Enzo comes along, the next threat, the next crisis, then we face it together. He reached for her hand, tentative, giving her space to pull away. She didn't. I'm not asking you to join my world. I'm asking if we can build a new world, one where you finish nursing school and I figure out how to run legitimate businesses, where we split time between New York and South Carolina, where your family becomes my family for real, not just for show. That sounds complicated, she whispered. Probably impossible, he agreed, but I'm willing to try if you are. Susan looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the hurt to the man underneath, the man who'd held Maya gently, who'd listened to Aunt Claudette's stories, who'd learned to cook collard greens from her mother, the man who'd protected her even when it meant breaking both their hearts. I'm terrified, she admitted. Me too. I don't want your money. I don't want to be saved. I know. You save yourself. I just want to stand beside you while you do it. She smiled then, small and tentative, a crack in the armor around her heart. One condition. Anything. No more secrets. No more protecting me by pushing me away. We face things together or not at all. Deal. He pulled a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a single diamond. Elegant, understated, perfect. This isn't a contract, it's a promise. No pressure, no timeline. Just when you're ready. If you're ever ready. Susan took the box, studying the ring with wonder. This is crazy. Completely insane, he agreed. My mother's going to say I told you so. She already did. I stopped by to ask permission before coming to find you. Susan laughed, the sound genuine and bright. You asked my mother's permission? I'm trying to do this right. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize she'd shed. I love you, Susan Jackson. No contract, no performance. Just real. She kissed him then, soft and deep, tasting tears and hope and new beginnings. Behind them, through the open door, she could hear her mother's delighted gasp, Maya's excited squeal, Aunt Claudette's knowing laughter. When they finally pulled apart, Minjun pressed his forehead to hers. Is that a yes? It's a maybe, she teased, or ask me again at Christmas.